The person we're going to be talking about today is Dwight D. Eisenhower. President Eisenhower was a bit of a unique individual in that he didn't really want to get into politics, and he'd been asked several times by both Republicans and Democrats to join their political parties. And it's kind of weird because we're starting sort of at the end of his story, but the start of the really big push into civil rights. If you are aware of Dwight D. Eisenhower, you might know him as the leader of the US forces in World War II, or as the first commander of NATO, or as President of the United States of America. Or you might know him from his hit role in He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, when he played Skeletor.
I live to be bad!
But with a man that has such a storied career, one of the things that seems to fly under the radar is his presidency. And one of the reasons that might be is just because in his presidency he just kinda did his job. President Eisenhower's role in the civil rights kinda gets underplayed because he's not the most exciting person to watch. And so it's hard to snip clips of him that can grab people's attention in schools and things like that. For the purposes of this video though, we're really just going to try and nail down the civil rights. And Dwight D. Eisenhower is a fascinating guy, and I would like to make more videos about him in the future, but we're just going to keep the focus of this really narrow. So, one of the first things he runs into is a project from his predecessor, Truman. Eisenhower and Truman didn't really get along. Eisenhower's political campaign spent a lot of time talking smack about Truman's administration.
Know your fucking place, trash.
And so when it came time to take over the presidency, Truman didn't really reach out much to make a smooth transition. One of the things that Truman had been working on, however, throughout his presidency was desegregating the military and the Washington staff. Eisenhower's logic was that wherever federal funds were being used, there could be no justification for segregation.
Nice.
Which covers the entire military. And while this order had been given under Truman, it was a classic case of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. One was too hot, one was too cold, and one was just right. The Air Force aggressively desegregated. They accepted everything and integrated all of their schooling, integrated all of their units across the US, including in the South. The Navy accepted the executive order, but they didn't really do much to change anything. African Americans mainly just stayed as stewards, which was their place before the executive order. And the Army aggressively pushed against it. They didn't want to desegregate. So the executive order is issued in 1948, and 5 years later, when Dwight Eisenhower comes into the presidency, the man who was previously the Supreme Commander of the US military forces and the General of the Army, managed to complete in 2 years what Truman took 5 years to do.
Cha-ching!
The main weapon that Eisenhower had was just to withhold funds. And what you would expect from a military man of his caliber, when he was told that it wouldn't be possible, he said, "We have not taken, nor shall we take, a single step back. There will be no second-class citizens in this country." Damn, imagine if politicians had the spine that Eisenhower had. Things would get done. So after desegregating the military, the next three events are very closely connected. On coming into the presidency, Eisenhower would make two important appointments. The first was Herbert Brownell as Attorney General, and the other was a Supreme Court Judge, Earl Warren. And this would be important later during the Brown v. Board decision. So the argument in Brown v. Board was whether segregated schools were in violation of the 14th Amendment of the American Constitution. Segregation had been legal in the US after Plessy versus Ferguson made its way to the Supreme Court, and the ruling from that case said that things can be separate and equal. So in Brown v. Board, the judges considered that position in the most positive light possible. If there were two segregated schools, one for whites and one for blacks, given the same physical facilities and tangible things, would both schools be equal? And they found that no, they could not possibly be equal because of the psychological impact of being barred from other schools. The ultimate finding of the Supreme Court was that separate but equal can have no place in public schooling. But crucially, they didn't give an order on the integration of schools. They just said that schools should be integrated at all possible haste. Because there was no order to integrate schools, a lot of schools just sat on their hands. And when integration was later forced on these schools, some of them closed, and in very famous scenarios, the governors actually fought back against the federal government. One of the more infamous schools was Little Rock Central High School, where the governor Orval Faubus said that he would not allow the schools to integrate.
What about you, sir? Do you think the colored students will show up?
If I got anything to do with it, they won't show up. Well, I think it's a breaking point of the school integration. I just don't feel that they have a right to go to school with them.
And President Eisenhower, upon hearing this and being a reasonable man, sat down and said, "Send in the 101st Airborne." What a reaction to send one of the most highly decorated units from World War II to force integration on a high school in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Such an extreme situation has been created in Little Rock. This challenge must be met, and with such measures as will preserve to the people as a whole their lawfully protected rights in a climate permitting their free and fair exercise. In the present case, the troops are there pursuant to law, solely for the purpose of preventing interference with the orders of the court.
And it worked. To stop the students from attending Little Rock High School, Faubus had mobilized the National Guard. And so Eisenhower ordered the 101st Airborne to escort the students into the school and then federalize the National Guard. And this would become a standard tactic in civil rights throughout the 1960s civil rights era.
Oh, wait a minute. You don't have an army. I guess that means you need to shut the up.
Kennedy would use it thoroughly, where he would federalize the state's National Guard and then use them to protect the black protesters. And we're not going to go into too much detail about the Little Rock Nine, because that's a whole thing in itself. But this was a really big deal, because it set a model for integration of segregated areas and communities and facilities. And it kind of lays out the pattern of what happens during desegregation later on, like in Birmingham. And a lot of the times it ends with the National Guard being federalized, and the segregationists either desegregating or closing down whatever facilities there were. Then Eisenhower would round this off with the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 1960, which mainly made it easier for African Americans to vote and to take part in the political process. Got a little sidetracked, but future Bobby here is going to finish the video. So during his presidency, there's not a lot really about what Dwight Eisenhower felt about civil rights. He did comment that he felt what was happening was good, but that civil rights protesters were asking for too much too fast. And ultimately, we can see that Dwight Eisenhower was a man that put doing his job above his own personal wishes. He did his job. He was part of the executive branch, the branch that enacts laws and makes sure others follow them. Could Eisenhower have done more? Probably. But that's not the kind of person he was. The courts had made their ruling, so he enforced it. Truman had started a process of desegregation, so he finished it. He wasn't there to see his wishes and his ideas implemented. He was there to carry out the job of the president. And ultimately, that's probably why he was so effective in his efforts for civil rights, is because he didn't overreach, but he also didn't underdo anything. He did exactly what he needed to do. One of the reasons why Dwight Eisenhower was so successful, though, was because he was the guy that won World War II. He was the guy that protected Europe from the communists. And so no one could ever question his faith in his country and his loyalty to his country and his sense of duty. And so the common thing, obviously, back then was anybody that was on the right was called a fascist, anyone on the left was called a communist. Classic. I mean, when did things change, right? So when a lot of desegregation talk came up, it took on that flair of accusing people of communism. But you can't accuse the guy that's been fighting communism, in Europe for years, that he's a communist. And that's why it was probably a lot smoother for him to get things done. Now, will there ever be another man like Dwight Eisenhower? Probably not. He was the product of a very specific time. And his uniqueness is what allowed him to be so effective. And I don't think people would vote for Dwight Eisenhower if he popped up today. If you had no idea who the man was, but he was a non-political politician, people wouldn't vote for him because they want that charisma, they want that challenge, they want the energy that these politicians we vote for today have. And then we complain when they don't do a good enough job. So yeah, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something, and if you did, hit the like button, hit subscribe, leave a comment, all that good stuff, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.